My name is Lorraine, and I am 63 years old. And on the night of our restaurant's 30th anniversary, my own son told me to know my place and step aside in front of the same reporters who had come to celebrate the food my late husband built with his bare hands. He thought I was just the owner's mother, the old woman wiping down tables in the back. What Wesley did not know was that the name glowing on that sign out front was my husband's name. The recipes that made my son famous were not his, and every brick of that empire he bragged about belonged to me. This is the story of how my silence almost destroyed my only child, and how breaking it finally saved him. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments. And please, stay with me until the end. The kitchen smelled like garlic, rennet, and brown butter, and 30 years of my life. I had been on my feet since 5 that morning, peeling, simmering, plating the way I always did, because Earl used to say a Kessler does not stand around while other people work. So I worked. I refilled water glasses for 200 guests in the private dining room of Earl's, our flagship on Wells Street in Chicago, while the late October wind rattled the big front windows and the string lights we hung every anniversary threw little gold coins of light across the brick. Nobody really looked at me. That was nothing new. I had spent the last few years learning how to be invisible in a room I owned. "Sit down, Lorraine," my sister-in-law Trudy said, patting the chair next to her with that soft, pitying smile people use on widows. "You've done plenty, hon. Let the kids handle it." "I'm all right," I told her, and I kept moving. From my spot near the pass, I could see the whole room. I could see my son. Wesley stood at the head of the long table like he was born there. 33 years old, sleeves rolled up just so. The good watch, his wife, gave him catching the light every time he lifted his glass. He had Earl's hands, big and sure, and Earl's gift too, that thing you cannot teach, where you taste a sauce once and know exactly what it is missing. I will give him that. The talent was always real. This place, Wes was telling a food writer from the Tribune, a young guy nodding into his phone. This place was a gut renovation when I took it over. I mean a wreck. Everybody told me a corner spot on Wells would eat me alive, rent, labor, the whole nine, and I just put my head down and grinded. Built the supplier relationships myself, locked in pricing nobody else in this city can touch. People ask me my secret, and honestly, there's no secret, you just outwork everybody. The reporter ate it up. Of course he did. It is a good story, the kid who outworks everybody. It is the kind of story this country loves. I would have loved it too if a single word of it had been true. His wife Sloane sat to his right in a red dress that cost more than most people in that room made in 2 weeks. She was already filming, holding her phone up at that practiced angle, narrating under her breath for the people who followed her online. "My husband, the genius," she murmured. "Watch him work this room." I should have been proud. A mother is supposed to be proud, and some buried, stubborn part of me was. But mostly I felt the way you feel when you watch someone wear your coat in the cold and call it their own. Then it happened. The Tribune writer asked Wes about the braised short rib, the one dish every review in the city mentioned, the one that put my son on the list of chefs to watch 3 years running. Wes started to answer, and out of pure habit, 30 years of habit, I stepped to the pass and adjusted the plate going out. The sauce had broken just slightly. Earl had a rule about that sauce. You finish it off the heat or you do not finish it at all. So I pulled it back and started to fix it the way I had fixed 10,000 plates before. Wesley saw me. "Mom." His voice cut clean across the table, and the room went quiet the way a room does when everybody can feel something coming. "What are you doing?" "Just the sauce, honey," I said. It broke a little. He set his glass down with a soft, deliberate click, and he smiled, but it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a man performing for a crowd. "Mom," he said, "you're not on staff here, okay? I appreciate everything I do, but you got to know your place. This is a working kitchen, this is my house, and I can't have you back there freelancing in front of guests. Go sit down, have a glass of wine, let me run my business." There it was, my house, my business. 200 people heard it. I watched the food writer's thumb move, quietly typing. I watched Trudy find something fascinating in her bread plate. I watched my own nephew, Earl's blood, study the ceiling like it owed him money. Sloane lowered her phone, but she did not lower it all the way, and I just knew, that little red dot was still going. Not one person said anything. Not one person said, "That's his mother, what is wrong with you?" Not one person said, "Easy, man." That's a hell of a thing to say on a night like this. Silence was so complete, I could hear the walk-in compressor kick on in the back. The same compressor Earl and I bought used in 1996 and never got around to replacing. I felt 30 years drain out of me right there, standing at the pass with a broken sauce in my hand, so I set the spoon down, gently. I untied my apron, the one with the little burn mark over the left hip from a fryer accident the year Wes was in high school, and I folded it once and laid it on the counter. My knees popped when I straightened up, and I thought, of course they do. You are 63 years old, and you have been standing since before the sun came up. Thank you all for coming, I said. My voice came out so calm it surprised even me. It really means the world, all of you being here for Earl tonight. This is probably the last anniversary I'll spend in this kitchen, so enjoy the short rib. He'd have wanted you to. Wes blinked. Mom, come on, don't be so dramatic, he said, already turning back to his audience. We're just talking about boundaries here. You're right, Wesley, I said. I looked at him, really looked at him, this boy I carried and fed and stayed up nights with. It's time everybody learned their place, and I walked out. I did not slam anything. I did not cry. The walk from the past to the front door of Earl's is 41 steps. I had counted them 1,000 times carrying trays, and I counted them one last time that night, past the wall of framed photos, past the bar Earl built from reclaimed oak, past the hostess stand where a kid named Diego held the door for me with a confused little nod, the way you hold a door for somebody's grandmother. Behind me, I heard a chair scrape. I heard Wes say in the bright fake voice of a man getting a party back on track, "So who's ready for dessert?" And the room exhaled, and the music came back up, and the laughter started again, and I understood something standing on that cold sidewalk on Wells Street. They thought I was going to my room to cry. They thought tomorrow I would come back soft and sorry, the way I always came back soft and sorry, and we would all pretend it never happened. The wind came up off the lake and went right through my coat, the same navy coat I had worn for 6 winters, because a good coat is a good coat, and I never saw the sense in replacing one that worked. I stood there a second and let the cold wake me all the way up. Then I took out my phone and I did not call a cab. I called a man named Gus. He answered on the second ring, because Gus always answers on the second ring, even on a Friday night, even after all these years. "Lorraine," he said, and I could hear the worry jump into his voice right away. "What's wrong? You okay?" "I'm fine," I told him. I watched my breath cloud up under the streetlight. Better than I've been in a long time, honestly. "What happened? What needed to happen?" I said. "Gus, I want everything on Wesley pulled together first thing Monday morning. The brand licensing agreement for the Earl's name, the supply co-op contracts, the lease on the Wells Street space, all of it, on my desk." There was a long quiet on the other end. A car hissed by on the wet pavement. Somewhere down the block, a couple was laughing about something, their whole night still ahead of them. "Lorraine," Gus said finally, and his voice was careful, the way you are careful with someone standing near an edge. "Are you sure about this? Because once we start pulling those threads, kid, you can't just tuck them back in." I thought about my apron folded on that counter. I thought about the words my house coming out of a mouth I taught to talk. I thought about Earl, gone almost 6 now, and the blue notebook sitting in my nightstand drawer with every recipe he ever dreamed up, written in his own crooked handwriting, including the short rib my son told the whole city he invented. "I have never been more sure of anything," I said. Down the street, the lights of Earl's glowed warm and gold in the window, and inside, my son was carving a cake with my husband's name on it, certain to his bones that he had built it all himself. I pulled my coat tight, and I turned, and I walked the other way. The car that picked me up that night was not a cab. It was a plain black Buick driven by a young man named Theo who works for us. And when he saw me standing on the curb, he hopped out and opened the back door like I was somebody, because to him I am. Evening, Mrs. Kessler, he said. Home, home, Theo, I said, the real one. And there it is, the thing nobody at that table knew. The thing I want you to understand before we go any further, because the rest of this story does not make a lick of sense without it. My son did not own that restaurant. He never had. Earl's on Wells Street, the flagship, the one Wesley swore up and down he got renovated with his own two hands, is one of 9 restaurants and a packaged sauce line that all sit under a company called Kessler Hospitality Group. And Kessler Hospitality Group has a chief executive whose name is Gus Delaney, a calm, gray-haired man in good suit who shakes the hands and gives the interviews and signs the papers, and who the whole city assumes is the boss. Gus is not the boss. I am the boss. I hold 80% of that company. Earl held the rest, and when he passed, it came to me, every share, which means there is exactly one person who decides what happens to that name on that sign, and you are listening to her. I never wanted the spotlight. Earl was the face when he was alive, big and warm and loud, the kind of man who remembered your kids' names and your bad knee. After he died, I could not stand to be out front. So I put Gus there, and I worked from a small office in the back of our building on Lake Street, and I let the world believe what it wanted to believe. I told myself that was humility. It took me a long time and a very cold walk down Wells Street to admit it was something closer to hiding. Theo dropped me at a 4-story walk-up on the west side, no doorman, no marble, a buzzer that sticks in the winter. 800 square feet, that is where I actually live. Not because I have to, because after 50 years of pinching every nickel, I never learned how to stop. And because a part of me always thought, if I live small, maybe my boy will stay hungry. Maybe he will stay grateful. I want to tell you how Earl and I built it so you understand what my son stood up and threw away in front of 200 people. I met Earl Kessler in 1983 in a diner outside Rockford, Illinois, where I waited tables and he washed dishes for $1 an hour over minimum. I was 20. He was 23 with the worst haircut you ever saw and the best hands. We got married 11 months later in a Lutheran church with 40 folding chairs, and our honeymoon was 2 nights in Wisconsin Dells because that was what we could swing. When Wesley came along, we were living over a laundromat in a 1-bedroom that always smelled like dryer sheets, which honestly could have been worsened. Earl cooked the overnight shift at a truck stop. I did the books for 3 different small businesses at the kitchen table, with the baby sleepy-teeth in a laundry basket beside me, because we could not afford a crib that wasn't somebody else's first. Every dollar that was not rent or formula went into a coffee can on top of the refrigerator. No vacations, no new clothes. We turned down so many dinners with friends, always with the same little white lie. Oh, we already ate. When the truth was we'd eaten cereals so we could keep what was in that can. It took us 9 years to open the first place. 9 years. A 28-seat storefront in a neighborhood everybody else had written off, with a used griddle and a hand-painted sign. Earl ran the line. I ran everything else, the money, the vendors, the landlord, the inspector, who wanted a little something extra and got a piece of my mind instead. Earl could look at an empty room and see a full one. I could look at a column of numbers and make it grow. That was us. That was the whole secret my son said did not exist. We opened a second place in 1999, then a third. We rode out 2008 when half the restaurants in the city went dark, and we did not just survive it, we bought. Cheap leases nobody wanted. A struggling supply outfit we turned into our own co-op so we would never again be at the mercy of a vendor jacking prices. By the time Earl's heart, no, I will tell it true, by the time Earl's body finally gave out, it was a stroke, a bad one. On a Tuesday in March of 2020, while the whole world was shutting down, we had 9 restaurants, a sauce line in 200 grocery stores, and more money than 2 kids from over a laundromat ever had any business dreaming about. His last clear word to me was my name, Lorraine, then nothing the doctors could fix. I am telling you all of this so you know it was not luck and it was not magic. It was 2 people and 40 years in 1 coffee can. That night, my first night back in the real apartment after the anniversary, I could not sleep. So I did what I always do when Earl feels close. I opened the bottom drawer of my nightstand and I took out the notebook. It is a cheap thing, honestly. A blue composition book, The marbled kind they sell 3 for $1 at the drugstore, the cover soft and furred at the corners from being handled so many years. Earl carried it everywhere. Every recipe he ever invented is in there in his own handwriting, which slanted hard to the right and got worse the more excited he was. The brine ratios, the little notes to himself, finish it off the heat or don't finish it at all. And on page 60-something, dated the winter of 2011, the braised short rib. His, down to the splash of cold coffee he swore was the trick. The same short rib my son described to a reporter, 3 years running, as the dish that came to him in a dream. He did not steal it on purpose. I want to be fair. When Wesley took over the Well Street kitchen, I handed him that recipe myself, the way you hand a kid the keys to a car you already filled with gas. I just never told him whose gas it was. He cooked it so many times he came to believe it lived in his own hands. That is the trouble with giving a person everything. After a while, they cannot tell the difference between what they earned and what they were handed, and neither, God help me, could I. I sat on the edge of my bed with that worn blue cover in my lap until almost 3 in the morning, and somewhere in there I stopped being sad and started being something harder and clearer. Monday morning I went to the office on Lake Street. Gus was already there. So was Diana Albrecht, our brand counsel, 52 years old, sharp as a tack and twice as quick, with a stack of folders squared off on the table in front of her like she was about to deal cards. I didn't sit down right away. I went to the window and looked out at the gray morning traffic, the L rattling by, people hustling to work the way Earl and I used to. You bring everything, I asked. It's all here, Diane said. But before we go through it, I have to ask you the lawyer question. Are you sure? Because there's the version where we do this gentle, and there's the version where your son's whole world comes apart inside of a month, and you're looking at the second one. I know exactly what I'm looking at, I said. Gus leaned forward. He's a good kid, Lorraine, under all the he waved a hand, all the strut. I half raised him after Earl got sick, and you know that. Are we sure the answer here is to take the floor out from under him? I turned around. Gus, I said, Earl and I built this quiet. We never wanted to be the rich family that throws it in people's faces. But somewhere along the line, my quiet stopped being humble and started being a lie. A lie that let my own son stand up Friday night and tell me to know my place. In my husband's kitchen, he thinks he did it all himself. So fine, let him do it himself. Let's find out what he's actually made of when the gas runs out. Diane opened the first folder. There were 3 of them, and I want you to understand exactly what was in each one, because over the next 2 weeks they were going to land on my son one after another, like 3 doors closing in a long hallway. The first folder was the brand, the license that let the Wells Street restaurant operate under the Earl's name and use our recipe library was up for renewal in 30 days, and renewal was my call. I did not have to do anything dramatic. I just had to not sign. The second folder was the supply co-op. The miracle pricing Wesley bragged about to that reporter, the deals nobody else in Chicago could touch. Those were our deals, our volume, our 40 years of relationships. His access to them ran through the company, and the company could pull it with a single letter. The third folder was the lease. The prime corner spot on Wells that my son believed he had been so clever to land. We owned the building. The lease was up. And again, all I had to do was decline to renew. 3 folders, 3 signatures, or in 2 cases, 3 signatures I simply would not give. It would have been easy to do it slow, Diane said. First the card, then the supplier. Give him time to adjust between each. No, I said. Slow would be cruel. Slow is bleeding a man a little every day. We do it clean and we do it close together, so he feels the whole weight of it at once and understands. Real understanding doesn't come from a speech. It comes from the floor disappearing. Gus rubbed his face with both hands. Earl's always said, he said quietly. Love that won't set a boundary isn't love. It's just being scared to be the bad guy. He'd be proud of you, Lorraine. I just wish you'd listened to him about 10 years sooner. That one landed. I felt it right under the breastbone. So do I said. God help me, so do I. I signed where I needed to sign, and I declined where I needed to decline. And Diane gathered the folders back up and squared them off again. And that was that. Outside, the L rattled by one more time. full of people hustling to jobs they actually had to keep. I drove home to my 800 square feet, and for the first time in 6 years, I slept the whole night through. Here is the thing about telling a story like this. I was not in the room for most of what happened next. I was across town in my little office, signing what I had to sign and waiting. So a lot of what I am about to tell you, I learned later, from Wesley himself, on the nights we finally started talking again. But I know it now the way you know your own kitchen in the dark, and I am going to tell it to you straight the way he told it to me. It started on a Tuesday, 10 days after the anniversary, with an email. Wes was at the pass doing prep, half listening to a line cook complain about the new dishwasher when his phone buzzed. He almost ignored it. Then he saw the subject line, and the way he tells it, his stomach dropped before his brain even caught up. Notice of non-renewal. Brand license and recipe library access. From Kessler Hospitality Group, Office of Brand Counsel. He read it 3 times. He told me later the words just slid off his eyes the first 2 passes, like his head refused to let them in. Will not be renewed. License to operate under the Earl's name terminates in 30 days. Access to the proprietary recipe library revoked as of the same date. What the hell, he said out loud. And the line cook said what? Chef and Wes said nothing. Nothing, give me a minute. He found the phone number at the bottom and he called it, and Diane's assistant answered in that smooth, professional voice we train into everybody. Kessler Hospitality, Brand Office. How can I help you? Wes said there had to be a mistake. He had never been late on a payment. He had built that location up from nothing. The assistant pulled the file, very polite, and told him there was no mistake. The ownership had simply chosen not to renew, which was fully within their rights under Clause 11 of his operating agreement. But why, Wes said. Did I do something? Was there a complaint? I don't have that information, sir. We only carry out the ownership's decisions. Who is the ownership? He said, and he told me, his voice cracked a little on it like a teenager's. I need to talk to whoever this is. This makes no sense. That's confidential, the assistant said. If you have to appeal, you can submit a written request to our office on Lake Street. And that was the first door closing. Now here is what cut deepest, and it is the part I still feel bad about because I did this to him, the recipe library. When that access shut off, it shut off the digital file of the short rib, the braised short rib. The dish on every review, the dish that got him named to that chef's to-watch list 3 years running. The dish, he told a Tribune reporter, came to him in a dream. He went to pull the recipe to retrain a cook, and it was gone, locked. Property of Kessler Hospitality Group. And the way he tells it, that is the moment the floor started to tilt. Because if the short rib was theirs, if his signature dish, the thing his whole reputation was built on, was a file in somebody else's cabinet that they could lock with a click, then what exactly had he invented? He sat down on an overturned milk crate in his own walk-in cooler with the cold coming off the shelves, and for the first time in his adult life, my son asked himself a question he had spent years never asking. What is actually mine? I want to be fair to him, the way I keep trying to be fair, because the talent was real. He could cook. He could run a line on a Saturday night with Tukes out sick and never lose his head. That was him. That was earned. But the deals, the name, the dish, the spot, the whole stage he was standing on, none of it was his. And he had spent so long calling it his that the truth, when it came, did not feel like learning something new. It felt like losing something he thought he owned. That was twist number 2, if you are keeping count, and it was the worst kind, the kind that comes from inside. He did not have long to sit with it. 4 days later, the second door. Wes placed his standing produce and protein order through the co-op the way he did every week, and the way he tells it, he did not even think about it. It was muscle memory. Click, click, done. Except this time he got a call back from the vendor, an old guy named Sal who had been moving boxes for our company since before Wes could drive. Hey, Sal said, kind of gentle about it, I gotta tell you, your pricing changed. You're off the co-op rate. What do you mean off it? Wes said. I mean, you're paying rack rate now, kid. Market. Whatever everybody else pays. Word came down, you're not on the group account anymore. Wes pulled up the new numbers and he told me the room kind of swam. The short rib alone, the beef, at real market price instead of our co-op price. ate his entire margin on the dish and then some. Every plate he sold of his most famous thing he was now losing money on. And it was not just the beef. It was the produce, the dairy, the oil, the paper goods, all of it, every line on every invoice creeping up at once. Because for 15 years he had been buying at a price he thought he negotiated and never actually had. He called me that night. I let it go to voicemail. I sat in my apartment with the phone buzzing on the table, and I made myself look at it until it stopped. Because if I picked up, I would fold. I knew I would tell him everything and fix it, and we would be right back where we started. Love that won't set a boundary isn't love. Gus's voice, Earl's voice. I let it ring out. The message he left was just, "Mom, something's going on with the restaurant. Can you call me? I think I'm in trouble." I played it twice, and then I put the phone in the other room. The third door came 8 days after the first, a certified letter. Wesley signed for it at the host's stand on a slow Wednesday afternoon, and he told me he knew before he opened it. He just knew the way you know on the third strike. Notice of non-renewal of lease. The corner spot on Wells, the prime location he had felt so clever about landing 5 years back. The location every other restaurant in the neighborhood envied. The building was owned by an LLC that rolled up, if you chased it far enough, into Kessler Hospitality Group. The lease was up at the end of the quarter, and it would not be renewed. So now picture where my son was standing. In 30 days, he would lose the name over his door. He had already lost the recipes that made him famous and the pricing that made him solvent. And now he was losing the four walls themselves, the name, the food, the deals, the building. Everything he had stood up and bragged about to a reporter peeled off him one strip at a time, like somebody quietly taking back a coat he thought was his. And here is where Wesley, my Wesley, finally did the thing he should have done years before. He stopped asking what is happening to me, and he started asking who is doing this. He pulled the lease. He read it for real this time. Every line, the way he never read anything when it was handed to him with a smile. He saw the LLC. He chased it. He told me he sat at his kitchen table at 2 a.m. with his laptop and a legal pad, drawing little boxes and arrows like a detective on a cop show. This LLC owns the building. This company owns that LLC. This name keeps showing up. Kessler, Kessler, his own name, back at him from every box. He told Sloan that night in the penthouse that he thought something was deeply wrong, that all of it traced back to one company, and the company had his last name on it. And Sloan, lying in bed, scrolling her phone, said without looking up, "Well, it's not like your family has any money, Wes. Your mom lives in a shoebox and wears the same coat to every holiday. Don't be paranoid. It's probably just some firm that bought up half the block." But Wes could not let it go. He told me he lay awake the whole night with one impossible thought circling like a fly he could not swat. The photo. He had seen a photo once, years ago, the one time he visited the Lake Street office to sign his operating agreement, back when he was too sure of himself to look at anything carefully. A big photo on the wall. His father in a chef's coat, smiling, and under it a little brass plate. Co-founder, his father had been a cook. A line cook who got lucky. That was the story Wes had always told himself, a working man who scraped together one little restaurant before he died. Not a co-founder of anything. Not of a company that owned buildings and locked recipes and set prices across half of Chicago. He got up before dawn. He did not wake Sloan. He drove to the office on Lake Street with the heater blowing and his hands tight on the wheel, and he told me later that the closer he got, the more sure he became, and the more sure he became, the more scared he got. Because if it was true, if even half of it was true, then everything he had said at that anniversary dinner, every word, my house, my business, know your place, he had said it all to the one person on earth who had handed him the whole world and let him believe he took it. He parked outside our building just as the sun was coming up gray over the L tracks, and he went inside to find out who he really was. The receptionist on Lake Street that morning was a young woman named Priya, and she told me afterward she almost knocked over her coffee as Wes came through the door, because she knew exactly who he was and exactly what was happening, and she had been told by me to say nothing. Wes did not even slow down. "I need to see whoever runs this company," he said. "The owner, the decision maker. I'm a licensee. I just got hit with 3 notices in 2 weeks and none of it makes sense. My name is Wesley Kessler. He told me Priya's face did a small thing right then, a flicker, and he caught it because by then he was catching everything. She stood up and said, "1 moment, please," and disappeared down the hall, and Wes was left standing in the lobby. That is when he really looked at the walls. Our lobby is just photographs, 30 years of them. The first storefront with a hand-painted sign. Earl in a paper hat at the truck stop, 23 years old. Ribbon cuttings, grand openings, a whole life in frames. And in the middle of it all, the big one. Earl in his chef's coat, grinning that grin, and the little brass plate underneath. Earl Kessler, co-founder, 1983 to 2020. Co-founder, Wes said out loud to nobody. And then he saw the other thing. The thing he had walked past at 25 and never registered. In the background of that big photo, a little out of focus, stood a woman in a plain dress with her hair pulled back, holding a clipboard, talking to 2 men in suits who were leaning in to listen to her, like she was the one who decided things. He had looked at that photo 100 times in his memory and never once looked at her. He leaned in close. He told me his heart was going like a drum. "Mr. Kessler." He turned around. Gus was standing in the hallway in a charcoal suit, hand already out, calm as Sunday morning. Wes shook it on reflex, but his eyes kept sliding back to the photo. "Gus Delaney," Gus said. "I'm the chief executive here. I understand you've got some concerns about your agreements. Why don't you come back to my office and we'll talk?" Wes followed him, but he stopped in front of the big photo, and he pointed at it, and he said, "That's my dad." Something moved across Gus's face. Wes saw it. "Yeah," Gus said quietly. "Earl was a lot more than an employee's son. But that's a longer conversation." In the office, Wes did not sit down. He stayed on his feet by the window and said, "I need you to tell me who owns this company. Who decided not to renew my license? Because I think, and this is going to sound crazy, I think my family is somehow tangled up in this and nobody's telling me." Gus folded his hands on the desk. "He is a good man, Gus, and I had put him in a hard spot, and I have apologized to him for it since. The decision not to renew is fully within the ownership's rights," he said. "It's a business decision." "Whose business?" Wes said. "Whose decision?" "Gus, that photo out there says co-founder under my father's name." "Co-founder of what? This?" He spread his arms at the office, the building, the whole thing. "Was my dad part of this company?" "Your father," Gus said carefully, "helped build this company from the ground up." "Yes, and my mother," Wes said. The word came out of him slow, like he was afraid of it. "Where does my mother fit?" Gus did not answer fast enough, and in that little half-second of silence, my son understood. He told me it landed on him all at once, not like learning something, but like remembering something he had worked very hard to forget. The Shuvuk's apartment, the same navy coat 6 winters running. The way she always insisted on working, on serving, on staying in the back, in a kitchen she somehow had keys to. The license, the recipes, the pricing, the lease, the name. Kessler, Kessler, Kessler. His mother owned all of it. He sat down then. He had to. He put his head in his hands right there in Gus's office, and he said, oh my God, it's her. It's been her the whole time." While that was happening on Lake Street, 2 miles away, his wife was learning the same lesson a different way. Sloan was at the register at a boutique on Oak Street, the good stretch, holding a dress she had already decided was hers, and she handed over the black card. The card that never had a limit, the card that made salespeople call her by name. She told me later, much later, in the one real conversation she and I ever had, that the card was the whole thing. The card was proof she had made it out, made it all the way out of where she came from, declined. "Run it again," she said with that tight little smile. Declined. And again. Declined. The salesgirl got that look, that careful pitying look, and said, "Is there another form of payment?" And the people in line behind Sloan started doing the thing where they study the ceiling, and Sloan felt her face go hot. She left the dress on the counter and walked out and called the bank from the sidewalk. And the bank told her the card was an authorized user card, that she was not the primary, that the primary account holder was a woman named Lorraine Kessler, and the primary account holder had closed it. Sloan called Wes. He answered from the parking lot outside our building, and he could barely talk. Your mother, Sloane said, and her voice was shaking, not with sadness, with fury. Your mother canceled my car, standing in the middle of Oak Street. Do you understand how that looked? Who does she think she is? Sloane, Wes said. It's not your card. It was never your card. It's hers. The card, the apartment, the restaurant, the deals, all of it, it's all hers. She owns the whole company. My mom owns everything. There was a long silence on the line. And then Sloane said the thing that ended them, though neither of them knew it yet. She said, well, then you need to go fix this. Go apologize. Get it back. And Wes, sitting in his car outside the building that held the truth, said, I don't think it works like that anymore. Now, I have to tell you the part that even Wes did not know that morning, the part that recolors everything that came before it, because there is one more truth inside this truth, and it is about Gus. Gus Delaney is not just our CEO. Gus Delaney is Earl's younger brother. He took his mother's maiden name in his 20s after a falling out with their father, a long, sad story that is not mine to tell, and he and Earl mended it years later, but the different last name stuck, and we never made a thing of it. Gus is Wesley's uncle, his blood. The man who signed every cold notice that took my son's world apart was the same man who taught Wes to ride a bike in a church parking lot in 1996, who sat in the third row at his high school graduation, who, when Earl got sick, made me a promise at the foot of a hospital bed that he would look after our boy no matter what it cost him. So when Wes thought a stranger in a suit was coldly dismantling his life, it was not a stranger. It was the uncle who loved him, carrying out the hardest thing a mother ever asked of anyone, and saying nothing, and letting himself be the villain so the lessons would land clean. Gus came around the desk that morning and crouched down next to my son, who was bent over with his head in his hands. And he did break, just a little, just for a second. It's going to be all right, kiddo, he said. It is. And Wes did not understand why this executive was talking to him like family. He would not understand for a while yet. He left the building in a daze. He drove home and the penthouse was already half empty. Sloane did not scream. She just packed. Wes told me she was very calm, almost gentle about it, folding things into matching luggage, and that was somehow worse than screaming. She told him she was not built for this. She told him the truth, finally, that she had grown up watching her own father lose a business and lose himself with it, watching her mother count change at a kitchen table, and that she had promised herself she would never go back to that, never, and that she was sorry, but she could not be there for the falling part. She could only be there for the standing part. She was not a villain. I want you to hear me say that, because the easy version of this story makes her one. She was a frightened girl who had clawed her way up out of something hard and could not make herself climb back down into it, not even for a man she loved. That is not evil. That is just a wound that never healed right. She left a note on the kitchen island. Wes kept it. He showed it to me once. Said, call me when you're the man I married again. And then she was gone. And the penthouse was quiet. And my son stood in the middle of a life that had just been revealed to belong to his mother, with no card and no name and no wife and no idea on God's earth who he was without all of it. That was the bottom. I knew he would hit it. I had built the whole thing so he would. What I did not know, sitting in my little apartment that night with the phone face down on the table so I would not pick it up, was whether my son would lie down at the bottom, or whether he would finally, for the first time in his life, start to climb. He did not lie down. It took him a while to get up, but he did not lie down, and I will be grateful for that until the day I follow Earl out of this world. Penthouse lease, the real one, ran out with everything else, and Wesley did not fight it. He found a place on his own, which I think was the first thing in 15 years he found entirely on his own, a fourth-floor walk-up on the west side, not far from where Earl and I lived over that laundromat a lifetime ago. 400 square feet, no elevator, a radiator that knocked all night like somebody trapped in the wall. $840 a month, and he told me he sat on the bare floor the first night with 2 suitcases and a sleeping bag and did the math on his phone over and over, like the numbers might change if he stared hard enough. They did not change. For the first time in his adult life, my son had to live on what he actually made, and what he actually made once you stripped away everything that had quietly been mine, was not much. His neighbor across the hall was an old man named Walt Bremer, 70 years old, suspenders and a gray crew cut, who knocked on the door the second day to borrow coffee and stayed an hour. Walt had cooked for 40 years, hotel kitchens, banquet halls, a diner he ran himself for a while until his knees gave out. He looked around Wesley's empty apartment and at the good knives still in their roll on the counter, the only thing of value my son had left, and he said, "You cook?" "I used to," Wes said. "Used to," Walt said, like it was the dumbest thing he ever heard. "Son, you either cook or you're dead. Which is it?" And that, more than anything I did, is what started to bring my boy back. Because Walt did not know Wesley Kessler, chef to watch. Walt did not know the Tribune, or the Short Rib, or the Penthouse. Walt knew a younger man with good hands and no money and a chip on his shoulder, and Walt had no patience for the chip. He taught Wes things Earl would have taught him if I had let Earl raise him a little harder. How to stretch a chicken across 3 days. How to make something out of the cheap cut, the bruised vegetable, the day-old bread. The real craft, the kind that does not photograph well. The kind nobody hands you because you have to earn it pan by pan. Wes bought a beat-up food cart with the last of his savings. He parked it near a transit stop and sold breakfast sandwiches and coffee to people on their way to work, $3.50 a sandwich. And he told me the first morning he made $41 and felt prouder of it than the chefs to watch list. $41 that no one had handed him. $41 with his name actually on it. Walt took him one Saturday to a place called the Loaves Project, a community kitchen and church basement run by a big, tired, gentle man named Hank Mercer, where they fed anybody who walked in, no questions, no money. And here is a thing my son did not know, a thing almost nobody knew. Earl cooked in that exact basement in the early 90s, before we had a dime, on his one day off a week, because he said a man who can cook and won't feed hungry people is just a man showing off. There is a photo of Earl on the wall down there too, younger than Wesley is now ladling soup. Wes found it on his third visit and had to step outside. He started going every week. He cooked for families who reminded him, he told me, of how he and I must have looked once, though he was too young to remember being poor. There was a boy who came in with his mother, 11 years old, name of Eli Foster, who hung around the kitchen pass, watching Wesley work with these huge, serious eyes. One day Eli said, "You make this look easy," and Wes said, "Nothing is easy, kid. It just gets easy if you do it 10,000 times. And Eli said, "I'm going to be a chef." And Wes, who 6 months earlier would have given that boy a selfie and a brush off, knelt down and said, "Then you start now." And he handed him a whisk. That was the start of something between the two of them that I will get to. There was a regular at his food cart, too. An older woman in a faded coat who came by most mornings ordered the cheapest thing, sometimes nothing, just a coffee. Some mornings she was $1 short, and Wesley waved it off, told her it was on the house, told her to have a good day, because Walt had taught him that you do not nickel and dime a person who is already counting nickels. He did not think anything of her. She was just one of his people now, one of the faces at the window. Remember her. I am asking you to remember her. And slowly, while he was learning all this, the story he had told himself about me started to come apart, and a truer one took its place. It was his grandmother who told him. My mother, Opal, 86 years old, sharp as a blade, living in a care home on the north side. Wes went to see one son the first time in too long, and she looked at him and saw right through him the way she has always seen through everybody. And she said, "So, you finally found out what your mother is." He sat by her bed and she told him things I never would have. She told him that I could have sold the company a dozen times over and lived in a mansion on the lake and never worked another day. That offers came every year and I turned them all down. That the reason I lived in 800 square feet and wore the same coat was not poverty and was not even thrift, not really. It was that every spare dollar I had been quietly moving for years into a foundation. A fund in Earl's name that put kitchen scholarships in the hands of kids who could not afford culinary school and kept the lights on in 3 community kitchens across the south and west sides. The Loaves Project was one of them. Eli Foster was going to be one of those scholarships, though nobody had told the boy yet. Wes sat there and absorbed it. The mother he had pitied, the small, sad widow living off her son's success, had been feeding half the hungry kids in Chicago out of a back office. While he told a reporter there was no secret, you just outwork everybody. He started writing to me after that. I never answered, every week, sometimes more, just a line or two. Mom, I hope you're okay. Mom, I saw Dad's picture in the church basement. Mom, I don't expect anything. I just want to talk. I read every single one of them sitting at my kitchen table, and every single one of them I made myself put down without replying, because Earl's voice and Gus's voice were the same voice now, and it said, let him finish. Let him get all the way to the other side. The last one he sent that fall said, Mom, I'm not asking you to forgive me, and I'm not asking for anything back. I just want you to know I finally understand. I'm learning. Slow, but I'm learning. I love you, Wes. I read that one 4 times. And then for the first time, I let an answer go out, not from me. From Gus, he texted my son 3 sentences. Your mother got your message. She says she's proud of you for finding honest work. Keep going. Wesley told me he read it, standing on a freezing corner next to his food cart, and grinned like a fool, and a little steam came up off the coffee urn between his hands, and he said it was the best day he'd had in a year. Around then, the thing started to take shape that would put us back in a room together. Working at the Loaves Project, watching families get pushed further and further out of the neighborhoods they grew up in because nobody could afford to live there anymore, Wes started sketching something on the backs of order tickets at night. A model, a shared community kitchen with affordable family meals, built into the kind of neighborhood the city had given up on, designed to just barely break even instead of squeeze a profit. Hank looked at the sketches and got quiet and said, this could actually work, you know. You should take this to somebody with real money. I don't have those contacts anymore, Wes said. I burned all of those down myself. Let me make a call, Hank said. There's a group that funds this kind of thing. Quiet money, impact people. They don't take many meetings, but when they do, they mean it. A week later, Wesley got an email. An anonymous impact investment group wanted to hear his pitch. A real meeting, real capital, the kind of thing that could turn his backs of order tickets dream into a building with a roof and a stove and an open door. He had 2 weeks to prepare the most important presentation of his life. He worked on it every single night after the cart, on the same cracked laptop, on Walt's kitchen table because his own was just a milk crate. Walt brought him coffee and watched him build it, slide by slide. One night, Walt looked at him a long while and said, You remind me of somebody. Who? Wes said. A woman I used to see years ago, Walt said, carried a clipboard everywhere, ran a meeting of 3 big shot men once like she owned the floor, and she did. Same jaw as you. Same way of squinting when you think hard. Wes looked up from the screen. What was her name? He said. Couldn't tell you, Walt said. But whoever she was, she built things that mattered, same as you're trying to do. Wesley did not say anything. But he told me later that he sat there a long time after Walt went to bed, looking at his father's recipe for a sauce he'd reconstructed from memory, and he thought about a woman with a clipboard and a jaw like his, and a coat she wore 6 winters running, and he understood for the first time in his life exactly whose floor he was trying to learn how to stand on. The morning of the pitch, he put on the only suit he had left, pressed it himself with a borrowed iron, and took the address Hank had given him out of his pocket to check it one more time. He read it twice. Then he stopped on the cold sidewalk, and he did not move for a full minute because he knew the address. It was a building on Lake Street. He almost did not go in. He told me that. He stood on the sidewalk on Lake Street in his pressed suit with his cracked laptop under his arm, and he thought about turning around because some part of him already knew, and knowing meant facing the one person on earth he was most ashamed to face. But he had spent 6 months learning how to not run from hard things, so he went in. Priya was at the desk again. She smiled at him, a real smile this time, and said, They're expecting you on the 4th floor. He had never been to the 4th floor. He rode up alone, and he told me his heart was going so hard he could feel it in his teeth. The doors opened on a long room with a glass wall and the whole gray sweep of the city behind it, and a long table, and people seated around it with folders and laptops, and at the head of that table, in a charcoal suit with her hair and her hands folded in front of her, sat his mother. I watched him come through that door. I had been waiting all morning, and I had promised myself I would not break, and I did not break. I kept my face the way I keep it in a negotiation, level and quiet, even though every cell in my body wanted to get up and put my arms around my boy. Mom, he said, it came out of him cracked. I'm Chairman Kessler in this room, I said. It was not cruel. I needed him to understand the ground he was standing on. And you're the chef who's here to pitch us a community kitchen. So let's hear it. To his credit, he did not crumble. He set up his cracked laptop, the screen with the tape on the corner, and he stood in front of a room of people who held his whole future in their folders, and he pitched. And he was good. Not the showman from the anniversary, not the kid working a reporter. He was something better. He was a man who knew the price of every single thing he was talking about, because he had paid it himself in cold mornings and $41 days and a sandwich at a time. He laid it all out. The shared kitchen, the break-even model, thin margins on purpose, dignity over profit. He answered every hard question Diane threw at him about cost overruns and permits, and he answered them like a man who had been on the floor instead of behind a desk because he had. Gus asked him how he could guarantee the numbers, and Wes said, because I've been buying groceries at rack rate for 6 months. I know exactly what everything costs now. I learned that the hard way. And somebody at that table almost smiled. And then Frances Hollis, 60-some years old on our social impact board, asked the question we had agreed she would ask. The test, the real reason we were all in that room. Mr. Kessler, she said, your numbers are honest. I'll give you that. But here's our counteroffer. We'll fund this at triple the scale today if you'll put the Earl's brand on it, trade down on your food costs to widen the margin, and give the company operational control instead of leaving it with the families. Make it a real business. What do you say? And there it was. Everything he had lost, handed straight back to him. The name, the money, the whole stage, rebuilt in an afternoon, if he would just become again the man who once stood up at a dinner table and told his mother to know her place. I watched my son's face. I am not ashamed to tell you I was holding my breath. No, Wes said. He said it quietly, and he said it fast, like it did not even need thinking about, and I felt something come loose in my chest. With respect, he said, no. If you put a brand on it and squeeze the food to widen the margin, it stops being the thing that's building. The whole point is that it belongs to the people it feeds. I spent my whole life calling things mine that weren't, and I'm done doing that. I'd rather build something small and real than something big with my name slapped on it. If that's a deal breaker, then it's a deal breaker. The room was quiet. And then Frances Hollis looked at me and she gave a small nod. And she said the thing that broke my son open. I have to tell you something, Mr. Kessler, she said. I've been a regular at your food cart for 2 months, the woman in the faded coat. You comped my coffee more times than I can count. You never knew who I was, and you were kind to me anyway, on the mornings you thought I had nothing. That's not in any folder. But it's the only number on this table I actually trust. There she was, the woman at the window, the one I asked you to remember. Wes sat down. He had to. He looked at her and then he looked at me, and his eyes were wet, and he said, I didn't. I had no idea. And Frances said, that's exactly the point, son. You don't get to be good only when someone's watching. We approved it. Full funding his way, the family's keeping control, Wesley as director, reporting to this board. No special treatment, paid like anyone, judged like anyone. Not as my son, as a man who had finally proven what he was made of. When the others filed out, it was just the two of us in that long room with the city behind the glass. I stood up and I came around the table and I reached into my bag and I took out the blue notebook. The marbled cover, soft at the corners, your father's whole life in his own crooked hand. I put it in my son's hands. This is yours now, I said. The short ribs in there. So is everything else. He'd have wanted you to have it once you knew what it was worth. Wesley held it like it might come apart. He turned the pages slow, his father's handwriting, the brine ratios, finish it off the heat or don't finish it at all. And he was crying without trying to hide it, the way he hadn't cried in front of me since he was a little boy. And then he got to the last page. I had never shown him the last page. Nobody had ever seen it but me. Because the winter before he died, Earl wrote our son a letter back there, in the back of his recipe book, the way Earl did everything, in the place he kept what mattered most. He never gave it to Wesley. He said the boy wasn't ready, that you don't hand a person something like that until they can understand it. And then the stroke came on a Tuesday, and the choice got taken out of both our hands. So I held it 6 years, waiting for a day I wasn't sure would ever come. Wes read it. I know it nearly by heart, because I read it 1,000 times in those 6 years. Alone at my kitchen table, said Wes. If you're reading this, your mother decided you were ready, and your mother is never wrong about that, so I'll trust her like I always did. You've got my hands, kid. I knew it the first time I watched you hold a knife. But hands aren't enough. I had the hands. Your mother had everything else, and she's the reason any of it stood up. The only thing I was ever scared of is that we made it too easy for you, that you'd have the gift and never learn the cost of it. And a gift without the cost is just a way to hurt people and call it talent. So whatever your mother did to get you to this letter, and knowing her, it was something hard, forgive her for it. It was the most love anybody ever showed you. Take care of her, feed people. That's the whole job. Love, Dad. We held on to each other in that empty boardroom for a long time. My son and me. 6 years of it, all at once. And I will not pretend the words were big or wise. He just kept saying, I'm sorry. And I kept saying, I know, baby, I know. And out the glass wall, the city we built, one brick at a time, went on about its mourning, not knowing or caring that a family had just found its way back to itself on the 4th floor. That was 2 years ago. Let me tell you how it looks now, because I think you've earned the ending. The community kitchen opened the next spring. It is called Earl's Table, and there is no flagship gloss on it, just long tables and good cheap food, and a door that does not close on anybody. The Loaves Project runs through it. Hank cried at the opening. So did Walt, who Wesley hired as his first head cook, knees and all, because a man who can cook should cook. Eli Foster got the scholarship, the boy with the whisk. He starts culinary school in the fall, and he told Wesley he wants to design kitchens for people like us. And Wes knelt down the way he does now and said, not like me, kid. Better than me. Sloan reached out once last year, not to come back, just to say she was sorry and that she was glad he had found his way down off the high wire and built something on the ground. Wes wished her well and meant it. Some wounds you do not reopen. You just hope they heal in the other person's the way they finally healed in you. And Wesley and I have dinner once a week. His one condition, the day he took the director job, no business talk. Just a mother and a son and a stove, making up for the years we lost. He cooks now. Walt taught him things I never let Earl teach him, and he is, God help me, almost as good as his father, and I tell him that, and he tells me to stop, and we are happy. We are actually happy. So that is the whole story. The night my silence almost cost me my only child, and the morning breaking it gave him back. Stay with me just one more minute. I want to say one true thing before you go. For years, I thought loving my son meant standing between him and every hard thing in the world. I was wrong. My silence wasn't humble. It was a kind of cowardice with good manners on it. I built that boy a beautiful house and forgot to teach him how to lay a single brick. And the day I finally let him fall, people told me I was cruel. But there are times the tightest hold you've got is the one where you let go. Money runs out. A name on a sign fades. The only thing that stays is who a person becomes when there's nobody left holding them up. I built an empire with these two hands. But the only thing I made that I'm truly proud of is the man my son built. Thank you for staying till the end. Tell me where you listened from. And go call somebody you love.